In 2016, a story occurred that is striking in its cruelty. A young girl was stalked by her ex-boyfriend, who became more and more dangerous every day. At some point, she even had to contact the police. But what happened next shocked the whole of Great Britain. Today, we will tell you about what happened to Alice Ruggles. Alice Ruggles was born on December 24, 1991, exactly one day before Christmas. Her parents, Sue and Clive, already had 2 children, and later another boy was born into the family. Together they lived in the tiny English village of Turlangton, located in Leicestershire. The family was very friendly. The older children always took care of Alice and her younger brother. At a local school, the girl began attending a drama club and quickly fell in love with acting. She took part in many theatrical productions, and all the teachers noted her natural talent. After leaving school at the age of 18, Alice entered Northumbria University, where she studied design. After receiving her diploma in 2014, she moved to a city called Gateshead and got a job at a large British media company, Sky. Alice rented an apartment with her neighbors, since at first it was difficult for her to maintain separate housing. In October 2015, when the girl was 23, she met a man named Harry Dillon. He came across her social media account through a mutual friends page. They began to communicate and soon fell in love with each other. Harry was originally from India and came to the UK on a student program. From a local Indian university, he transferred to Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh. After studying, he decided to stay in England and join the army. Sometime later, he was sent to Afghanistan, and it was there that he began communicating with Alice. At first, they just corresponded. Then they started calling several times a week, and eventually a relationship began between them. They were looking forward to Harry returning to the UK so they could finally meet. When this happened, they went on several dates, and Harry made a good impression on Alice. They had a great time, and the mutual sympathy between them only grew stronger. However, a few weeks later they had to be separated again. Harry was due to deploy to Afghanistan again for 2 months, and they planned to continue their relationship after that. Until then, the couple continued to communicate online, until Harry finally returned to England in April. He lived in a military unit in Edinburgh, from which it was almost 200 kilometers from the city where Alice lived. Despite this, Harry tried to go to her whenever possible. A few months after Harry returned to England, Alice invited him to a family holiday, and it seemed to everyone that their relationship was only getting stronger. Time passed, and Alice's acquaintances began to notice dramatic changes in her behavior. Before, she was always cheerful, sociable, and positive. But every day something changed in her. The girl withdrew into herself, was depressed most of the time, and completely stopped spending time with friends. She practically stopped communicating with them even on social networks, and no one could understand what was happening. Alice also became hot-tempered, and at one point she got into an argument with her flatmates. The girl packed her things and moved to the apartment of her work colleague. Alice's family and friends began to suspect that the reason for such dramatic changes was her new boyfriend, Harry. At first, she herself was reluctant to share the problems in their relationship, but over time, it was simply impossible to hide them. As it turned out, Harry turned out to be not at all the good-natured and caring man he was in the first months after they met. The longer this relationship lasted, the more he tried to control Alice's life in all its aspects. Harry was against her meeting friends and communicating with other men, even if they were her old acquaintances and work colleagues. He began to monitor her correspondence on social networks and constantly accuse her of wanting to cheat on him. Every time she talked with friends or was going to go somewhere with them, Harry caused a scandal. But what is much more interesting is that at the same time, Harry began to almost openly cheat on her, meeting women from dating sites for one night without obligations. After that, he often told Alice about these women to make her jealous. It even got to the point that in August one of these women wrote to Alice on social networks. At this point, the girl decided to leave Harry. But he didn't want to let her go at all. He flooded Alice with messages and calls in which he tried to get her back by any means necessary. At first, he said that he loved her, cried into the phone, and promised to change for the better. Then he began to openly manipulate the girl, promising to take her own life and pin all the blame on her. It even came down to direct threats. It turned out that Harry, secretly from Alice, took photographs of her while she was changing clothes. The man threatened to post these pictures on the internet if she did not return to him. Ultimately, Alice decided to simply ignore him, and then Harry changed tactics. He started calling her friends and relatives and asking them to talk some sense into the girl. Realizing that this also did not work, he began to write her paper letters with poems about his love for her. However, he soon once again turned to threats and blackmail. But Alice also did not respond to these letters. A little later, it turned out that Harry managed to hack her account and monitored all her correspondence. From there, he learned that in September, Alice began communicating with a man named Mike, who was an army officer and at that moment was in another country. Harry was furious. He started writing to Mike about how Alice was still in love with him and sleeping with him, and also wrote various nasty things about her. But by that time, Mike already knew about Harry and did not attach any importance to his words. He continued his relationship with Alice, and it seemed that the girl managed to get out of the whole situation with Harry. She again became sociable, cheerful, and happy. Alas, this did not last long. On September 30th, Harry left her a voicemail begging her to pick up the phone. Alice ignored him, and then he decided to go to her house. The man drove 2.5 hours from his military unit to her apartment. But then he behaved frankly strangely. First, he rang the doorbell and ran away. Alice was in the house, but did not open it because she did not see anyone through the peephole. The situation repeated itself several more times. Then, several hours later, Harry climbed over the fence and went to her bedroom window. Alice lived on the first floor of a 2-story house with a fenced area. Harry knocked on the window and hid, leaving a box of chocolates and a bouquet on the windowsill. What was happening greatly frightened Alice. She immediately realized that Harry was behind all this. Also, as she approached the window, she momentarily saw a man hiding out of her line of sight. He didn't finish there. Hiding in her yard, Harry recorded several creepy voicemails. Their contents caused Alice to panic. One of them began with the words, "You once said that guys like me end up sending people to the next world." After these words, he began to repeat repeatedly that he did not want to touch her. From his voice, Alice thought he was primarily trying to convince himself. Finally, he wished her good night and left. All this was already enough for Alice to contact the police. After what happened, she began to seriously fear for her life and did not know how else to protect herself from Harry. The operator offered her 2 options to solve the problem. She could seek an injunction against Harry, or ask the police to issue a legal notice, known in Britain as a pin, in his name. It allowed the police to arrest a man if he approached or contacted Alice. The girl chose this option. The next day, the police came to her, took her statement, and assured her that Harry would now face consequences if he bothered her again. Sometime later, the policeman called the military unit and informed the senior officer about the measures taken against Harry. It is noteworthy that the police did not contact him personally, even by telephone, let alone a personal visit. Although by law they were obliged to do this. Having learned that Alice had gone to the police, he got angry and wrote her another letter. Along with it, he sent her a whole box of things that reminded him of her. In the letter, he said that because of her complaint, his phone, tablet, and laptop were taken away. He also promised not to bother her anymore. But Alice knew for sure that he would not calm down so easily. When she first contacted the police, she was told to call if Harry contacted her again. So she did. The girl told about the letter and the box with things, but the operator did not know what measures should be taken in this case. Moreover, he asked Alice herself what actions she expected from them. In the end, he promised that some other employee would call her back. Of course, this response from the police shocked Alice, and she had no idea what to do next. A few hours later, the officer called her back and listened to the whole story. He went on to ask if she wanted the police to arrest Harry. And here Alice made a fatal mistake. She felt sorry for him and answered negatively. However, even if arrested, Harry would not receive any punishment. They would have simply kept him in the department for a while and released him. After this, Alice realized that the police could not help her in this situation. Therefore, she could only rely on herself. On October 12th, 5 days after going to the police, Alice was still depressed and scared. She hoped to take her mind off these anxious thoughts this weekend. Mike was supposed to come to her, and they planned to spend the next few days together. That evening, Alice returned from work. Her neighbor was not at home. The girl began to get ready for bed, simultaneously texting with Mike about the upcoming meeting. But she didn't know that all this time Harry was standing in the yard of her house and watching. Taking advantage of the fact that Alice had opened the window, he climbed into her bedroom and headed to the kitchen. There he took a knife and went to the bathroom where the girl was. Further events unfolded rapidly. Alice was gone almost instantly. After that, he got out of the apartment, got into the car, and drove back to his military unit. Less than an hour later, Alice's neighbor returned home to find the front door locked from the inside. She knocked several times, hoping that Alice would open for her, but this did not happen. Then the neighbor went into the backyard to knock on her bedroom window. But what she saw shocked her. Through the open window, the neighbor saw Alice lying on the floor in a burgundy bathtub filled to the brim. She immediately called the police and told them what had happened in a panic. During the call, she also said, "We knew that everything was going to this. Her ex is a real psychopath." Less than 2 minutes after the call began, the neighbor heard police sirens approaching. Doctors arrived with them and were unable to help Alice. It immediately became obvious to them that this was an attack. Due to the fact that a neighbor named Harry Dillon as a potential culprit, the police immediately began searching for him. After running his car's registration plates, they established that the man had driven from Edinburgh to Newcastle that day. His car was caught on several surveillance cameras. Within a few hours, the police arrived at the military unit and arrested Harry. They took him to the police station and began interrogating him. The man admitted that he went to Alice, but denied his involvement in the crime. According to him, he came to her to talk. She allegedly came outside and hit him in the face while talking. Then Harry allegedly got into the car and drove back to the unit. But detectives quickly determined that his story had nothing to do with reality. They found out from surveillance cameras that Harry arrived at Alice's house before she returned from work. He parked the car and waited. But that's not all. Investigators examined his phone and found that while Harry was sitting in the car, he was chatting with a random girl from a dating site and arranging to meet with her that same night. Detectives also found traces of burgundy drops on the steering wheel of Harry's car, and analysis showed they belonged to Alice. Moreover, the man stole her phone and took it with him, which is why the geolocation of the device completely coincided with the movements of the criminal that day. All this was already enough to bring charges for a crime and bring the case to court. However, the first meeting took place only almost a year later. In April 2017, Harry's lawyers realized that with such a set of evidence against their client, it was necessary to come up with a new story. As a result, the man stated that he actually came to Alice to pick up his things, but a quarrel arose between them. Alice then allegedly took a knife and attacked him, but accidentally stabbed herself 24 times. After that, he watched her go to another world, and even listened to her last words. She allegedly stated that she hated her family. Of course, this crazy story was not taken seriously. Moreover, during the court hearings, another terrible fact emerged. Before the crime, Harry visited Alice's house several times, sneaked into the backyard, and took photographs. According to the prosecution, he carefully planned this attempt in advance. After 11 days, the court issued a guilty verdict. Life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 22 years. While reading the verdict, the judge noted that Harry had not shown an ounce of remorse or pity. Instead, he was focused only on coming up with the most plausible story. During the trial, another creepy detail from Harry's past came to light. 3 years before these events, his ex-girlfriend obtained a restraining order against him because he was harassing her in the same way that he would later harass Alice. But the police simply did not know about this. After the crime, society and the media harshly criticized the police. They were accused of failing to protect Alice from a dangerous psychopath, leaving the matter to chance. The 2 officers were later subject to disciplinary action. The army was also criticized. The public was indignant at the fact that such an unbalanced and dangerous person was taken there. Additionally, management did not take any action against Harry when the pin was issued against him. Sometime later, Alice's family launched a foundation named in her honor. His goal was to ensure that victims of stalking receive immediate and appropriate assistance from the police. Alice's case showed that law enforcement agencies are simply unable to provide such protection, so changes in legislation are necessary. In 2019, a law was passed that makes it easier to issue restraining orders against people who stalk their victims. Despite this, Alice's family continues to work on the fund and hopes that it will help change the situation in the country for the better. Now all her relatives and friends believe that this tragedy could have been avoided if the police had taken their duties more seriously.